How we doing? Welcome to Thursday, Ivy Nation Sports Talk. We are up, we are running, we are rolling on time. So you know what that means? I'm flying solo today. That's pretty much. I've been sitting here, kind of watching the chat in the background for the last couple of minutes. It looks like Salty is not here. I got the bat signal from Salty though. He said I'm on the clock, and so I fired up the countdown. And away we go. Yeah, so my two typical co-hosts, not here to join me for the end of Bucknuts week on this Thursday. Vince's son has a soccer game, so he's taking care of that. Jesse has a work function, so he is out for that. I won't be solo for the whole thing, though. I'm going to have some comments from Marcus Freeman here in a minute, and then Chase Brown from 11warriors.com, Ohio State insider, will join me, and we'll talk a little Ohio State. We'll get some insight into Ohio State. I guarantee you it will be better than the insight that you got when we got alleged North Carolina State insight a couple of weeks ago. Just leave it at that, okay? Michael Hahn, thank you. Trayvon Diggs tore his ACL in practice today, out for the rest of the season with for the Cowboys. Michael, I do appreciate you saying that. As a Giants fan, it does mean a lot. It's we'll see how it goes. It's early, very good player, all that, but Tommy Gunn says I should have called him, and El Conquistador says patch him in. He's ready to go. Where were you 10 minutes ago? Stymie looking forward to this weekend. I mean, I tell you what, this is like, I don't know about wherever everyone else lives, but here in South Bend, it has felt more fall-like the last couple of weeks. And of course, is today or is it tomorrow the official first day of fall? Whichever one it is. Like we've been feeling fall a little bit, but he says he's going to be up, Stymie, at 4 a.m. cooking. Don't know if he'll have anything to do by noon. Florida State, Clemson, Colorado at Oregon, and then the redemption game. I mean, pace yourself on Saturday. That's the benefit with this slate that we've got this Saturday. I am looking forward to kind of laying around and watching some other games myself before I head over to Notre Dame Stadium Saturday night for the big games. But I'm looking forward to that. I really want to see that Florida State Clemson game as well. So glad we'll get to see that at noon. I was a little surprised that was a noon kickoff, but they're kicking at noon. And then I think that Colorado Oregon game out in Eugene, I believe that's a 3:30 Eastern time kickoff, if I'm not mistaken. But as of right now, as we speak, doing this live, we're just a little bit more than 48 hours from Notre Dame, Ohio State kicking off at Notre Dame Stadium. Hashtag let them stand. Never forget that. Let them stand this Saturday night. All right, so Marcus Freeman news from his noon Zoom call today. A couple of injury updates to start off with. First, Marcus Freeman said today that both Mitchell Evans, the tight end, and defensive tackle Gabe Rubio will play this Saturday. Evans, of course, had the concussion, missed last week. Rubio's been out the last 3 weeks. He's only played in the Navy game so far, injured his knee. He'll be back. Good news, on both counts, obviously. I mean, you always want to get everybody back. But from a blocking standpoint, I think Mitchell Evans, and from a receiving standpoint as well. But I think more so, like, especially what Holden Stays has become, and the fact that Stays is more a receiver than a blocker. Evans is the better blocker of the two. He'll be a factor, I think, in the Irish run game. So good to get him back against that Ohio State defensive front. Of course, Rubio gives him another big physical body up front, 6'5", over 300 pounds. And Donovan Heinisch is he's had more reps and he's played pretty well with Rubio out, but 15 pounds, couple biscuits lighter than Rubio. So I think that having Rubio back is going to be a definite plus for the Irish, looking to slow down that Travion Henderson running game for the Buckeyes Saturday night. And of course, already we mentioned earlier this week, JD Bertrand, DJ Brown, they'll both be back, concussion, hamstring, respectively. So they will be back in action as well. So really almost full strength. Still lacking Eli Raridan. He's not going to play yet. I'm guessing at least a couple of weeks away. We'll find out on that. But good to get those guys back and ready to go for Ohio State Saturday night. As to Marcus Freeman, he kind of always has a theme every week for his team, like what's the theme of the week kind of thing. So again, we talked to him earlier today via the Zoom call. Here was his theme for Ohio State week.
It's been consistent with the last couple of weeks, right? And this week is it's probably a little bit noisier because of the opponent, because of College Game Day, Pat McAfee, all these different things that are going on here. The biggest thing is control the noise, turn it down, focus on the moment, focus on today's practice and what we're doing now, because this is what will give us the best opportunity to perform at a high level on Saturday. So it's really been do what we do, but do it better, right? And that's what I've told those guys on Monday when I met with them. Do what we do. What we've done is good enough, but do it better. And that's a reminder, stay in the moment, turn down the noise, and focus on us.
Love it when I do that. I muted myself when Freeman was talking so that I wouldn't make any noise over him. And so what was I saying? I appreciate you telling me that I was muted. Everyone's saying that I was muted. That's kind of the way to go. I guess I'm going to have to not mute myself. But, no rat poison, control the noise, all the standard coaching speak type stuff that Marcus Freeman was talking about there. But this team seems like it's pretty focused, pretty on point. They've been there. Really the only thing that we've seen them kind of get off track is the penalties the last couple of weeks. But just in terms of keeping all the noise out, it probably gets a little bit tougher as you go through the week, because now you're getting into, you've got game day coming on Saturday, you've got the Pat McAfee show coming on Friday. They're all going to be set up out on campus, outside of the stadium and all that kind of stuff. But it's fun. It's a measuring stick for you. It kind of says, you've got the big game of college football for the week. So, again, I think that it sounds like they've done a pretty good job of controlling it all week. Matt wanted to know what the weather is going to be. Is the weather going to be nice Saturday? I saw on TV the forecast just before I came in here to start things off. I think they said around 70 at kickoff Saturday night. And then it'll, probably cool off into the 60s over the course of the game. So it should be a really good early fall night for the game this Saturday night. So again, heard Marcus Freeman there talking about the theme for the week. But what about the energy? What's the energy level been like at practice this week? Any more energy, I guess, than a typical week, since you're gearing up for Ohio State Saturday night?
I hope, that practices every week are spirited. And we've had really good Tuesday and Wednesday practice. As I told them, the hardest thing to do is to really, as we get closer to the game, the noise gets louder, right? And you start thinking about things that are outcome driven, that have nothing to do with us preparing for this game. And so I've been really hard on them to make sure that this week of practice, the energy is always there, right? And we know they're going to practice with energy and emotion, big game, but to make sure we're very intentional on our practice habits and what we're doing on every single play. I've tried to, have a couple periods in practice where the music is really loud and we're going fast just to get them to be able to lock in on this play, get the call, get lined up, and execute. So I've been really pleased with the Tuesday and Wednesday practice. We're going to have a great Thursday practice too.
11th time game day has been here going back to 1993. And it's the first time since the number 4 Irish beat number 1 Clemson in 2020. The Irish are 6-4 when game day has been here. 2 of the last 3 of them have gone to overtime. Do you know which ones? Do you know which ones went to overtime? Of course, that Clemson game, double overtime. And then before that, it was, drum roll, the 2012 Stanford game that went to overtime. Those are the last 2 of the last 3 times that game day was here for a Notre Dame game. So Stymie says, oops, take that out of there. Stymie says, currently the sun sets at 7:41. So even if it's in the 70s at kick, it'll drop throughout the game. Yes, weatherman Stymie, you are correct. You have that right. And as El Conquistador says, Stanford in 12 was great. It was, wasn't it? And I heard, was talking about the Pat McAfee show a second ago. He was saying today Manti Te'o is going to be on tomorrow's show. So that'll be the live show at Notre Dame. He didn't necessarily specify whether or not he's going to be on the set. I think he will be. So, it would make sense with College Game Day being here and just, as amped up and hyped up as everyone is. I haven't heard for sure that Manti is going to be on campus, but McAfee did say Manti is going to be on the show. Marcus Freeman's going to be on the show, and all that kind of good jazz. As Josh says, joining the show late, NC State Insider was underwhelming. Got a good chuckle. I guarantee you, you'll get some good information here in just a few minutes from Chase Brown. One final thought from Marcus Freeman, and of course, you got questions and stuff in the queue. You can throw them up in there because I'll be doing the Chase Brown interview here in just a minute. But one connection in this game, we talked a little bit about this yesterday. James Laurinaitis, who of course was a grad assistant for a year with Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, he's got the same position now at Ohio State. He left Notre Dame after a year, went back to his alma mater. Of course, those two played there together in the early 2000s. Again, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but is that a potential issue for Notre Dame? Like, do they have to disguise any signs and signals? Do they have to change up their signals and signs and all that kind of stuff? Here's what Freeman said about that.
We try to change weekly. We always look at our signals, we look at some of the communication, and each week it changes. So it will be no different this week. You have to continue to change things up or all your games are on TV. They can hear the checks on TV. You can see signals on TV. That's a part of the game of football that we constantly try to every week. Small changes, right, to keep teams off balance that might be hearing our checks or seeing our signals. So it has less to do with Laurinaitis being on their staff and more to do with us continuously trying to keep our opponents, off balance in terms of what we're signaling, what our checks are.
Change it up. Every game makes sense. Hadn't really thought about what Marcus Freeman was saying in terms of like the games are on TV, and you always see the like the play callers. You'll see them with their call sheet covering up their mouth so nobody's reading their lips and stuff like that. And obviously, like at a baseball game, you see them put their gloves or their hands over their mouth so nobody's reading their lips. I mean, it makes sense though, because there are microphones everywhere. And I mean, there are more microphones everywhere now than ever out there on the field. So I guess you pretty much probably have to change them up every game. So there's some thoughts from Marcus Freeman from his media Zoom earlier today. Again, he'll be making the rounds the next couple of days on ESPN with a McAfee show and with College Game Day as well. Their Pat McAfee show broadcasting live on campus, noon to 2 tomorrow. It'll basically be the same stage, same basic setup that College Game Day has. They'll be there. Game Day will be out there Saturday morning at 10 a.m. as well. So if you're rolling into the game or rolling through campus this week, then just you can head over there and check that out. Should be a lot of fun. Stymie apparently is Manti's assistant. He said he will not be on campus obligation with his wife on Saturday, but he will be at the USC game. So good to know. Unverified except through Stymie. So thank you, Stymie, for that information. Matt Lee, what position battle am I most looking forward to watch Saturday night? Mine is Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Benjamin Morrison, which could be the best matchup in college football this year. I don't know that they're going to exclusively keep Benjamin Morrison on Marvin Harrison Jr. all night, just because Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be moving around to different spots. You might see him field one time. You might see him boundary the next. He will line up in the slot. So I don't know that Notre Dame necessarily keeps Benjamin Morrison there. But as Jesse said earlier, I think you have to, regardless of who it is, whether it's Benjamin Morrison, Cam Hart, Thomas Harper, nickel if he's in the slot, whoever it happens to be, Clarence Lewis from time to time, whoever it is, you have to pay specific attention to him. You're going to be mixing up man coverage and zone coverage as well. So I think we definitely see those guys go head-to-head sometimes, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be Benjamin Morrison locked on Marvin Harrison Jr. all night. We'll see him, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be all night long. That's not necessarily the way Notre Dame has gone upon its business with its secondary, and I think they have faith, and they should have faith in Cam Hart as well, and Thomas Harper for that matter. So, I mean, I think it's the secondary against Marvin Harrison Jr. in that receiving core. That is going to be a heck of a matchup. And the other one I'm looking at is, it's not an individual matchup, but it's both sides of the ball in the trenches. Who runs the ball better is going to have a huge advantage in this game. Ohio State, like Notre Dame can't let Ohio State get the ball, get running the football, because they need to put the less experienced quarterback, Kyle McCord, into disadvantaged situations, put him behind the chains, give him second and third and long as much as possible, put him into obvious passing situations. And, so from that perspective, Notre Dame needs to be able to at least limit that Ohio State running game. And then on the other side of the ball, we know that Notre Dame needs to run the football to be effective. Now, at the same time, like when you look at the two quarterbacks, if you have to put the game on the shoulders of one of the two quarterbacks, you'd much rather it be Sam Hartman. Like if Notre Dame's running game is somewhat ineffective or somewhat effective, but you have to rely on Sam Hartman, if you end up like in a 60-40 or 70-30 split of pass to run, you would much rather be in that situation if you're Notre Dame than Ohio State. So those are the matchups that I'm looking at as well. So I think that running the football is going to be even more important for Ohio State. And so Notre Dame's defensive line against what has been a suspect Ohio State offensive line, I think that's going to be, to me, just as key as what happens in the secondary with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Ibuka and all those guys. So that's those are a couple of the matchups that I'm looking at. So without any further ado, good time, I guess, maybe to just say, quick reminder, hit the like button, of course, on the YouTube, and subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platforms. But let's turn our attention right now to Ohio State, if I can hit the right button. I did have to pre-record this with Chase Brown, so just be kind of aware of that. At the same time, I will be here, like in the chat, answering questions if anything pops up and that kind of thing. So without any further ado, let's talk some Ohio State. Well, we're back with our old friend Chase Brown. This is, I think, like the third time in the last year that we've had Chase on. Of course, with Notre Dame playing at Ohio State last year. We talked to him before that game. We talked to him back in the spring after spring practice wrapped up for the Buckeyes. He's from 11warriors.com. Chase, as always, good to have you. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm gonna miss talking to you. Ohio State's not gonna play Notre Dame anymore, and
I know
There'll be
we
no
might have to check in
conversations between us.
just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Maybe with the expanded playoff coming here in the near future, maybe they end up crossing paths again sometime soon. Who knows?
Yeah, well, that'd be great.
I mean, I think the fan bases might like it anyway. So, well, last year's game was really ultra hyped. I think in part because it started off the season and it had been so long since the two programs had played just in the regular season. It had been since 1996, and Notre Dame's played 4 games at this point. Ohio State's played 3 games, and I don't know what it feels like from that side, but especially from a fan standpoint here. I mean, I think everyone's really kind of has essentially been looking at this as the start of the season, even though it's a few games in this time. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. It's last season with the game being in week 1, it felt like all of the anticipation, all of the hype of the season was then toppled on with the addition to the Notre Dame game. It's an exciting start to the season for both fan bases because it was a top 10 matchup. Actually, I think it was a top 5 matchup at the time.
Right.
And that in itself is exciting. Now you kind of have a little bit of buildup. Both teams have certain expectations for what they've put on film and what they've shown fans so far. So it's a different way to approach the game this time around, but I still think that excitement is at an all-time high.
A lot of talk on this end about what the stadium is going to look like Saturday night. Is it going to be a sea of red? We've seen that a few times here historically, going back to Nebraska in 2000, Georgia in 2017. And Cincinnati was not as strong as either one of those two fan bases turning out. Are you expecting a very large turnout from Ohio State this weekend here in South Bend?
I would think so. I mean, there always is for Ohio State's road game because, sort of the trademark of Ohio State, or its nickname is Buckeye Nation, right? There's Ohio State fans everywhere. That includes South Bend. And I think that because the distance between Columbus and South Bend is manageable for people to drive maybe in a day, maybe do a stay over on Saturday night and leave and come back on Sunday morning, that a good contingent of Ohio State fans will be at the game. I know that with the green out happening, that there's going to be an extra incentive for Ohio State fans to sort of group together and maybe wear a certain color. Scarlet's probably the one that they would wear because that cuts through that green, right? So I think that Ohio State fans may be up to the challenge. It'll just depend on how many were able to get tickets, because I know that the system for getting tickets may be a little bit different with Notre Dame than it is here for Ohio State. But I do think that there was an incentive for Ohio State fans to make that trip, and then obviously to try and cut through that green out that Notre Dame may be having.
Yeah, and Notre Dame has tried to do, because of some of those past cases that I just mentioned, Notre Dame has tried to do everything they can from a ticketing standpoint to make it as difficult as possible. But you know how the secondary ticket market works. I'll be really curious to see how far that actually goes.
Yeah, it's something where, again, we talked about coming into this. It's such a highly anticipated matchup that it seems like really for Ohio State fans, if we look at their schedule, it's one of the biggest games on the schedule. You have Notre Dame, you have Wisconsin, which will be a road game in Madison. You have a home game against Penn State, and then you have the Michigan game up in Ann Arbor. So this really is the most, I guess it's the most anticipated matchup, obviously this early in the season, but it's also one outside of the Penn State game, which will be at home, that could probably be the most attainable for people to travel to and for tickets to be somewhat affordable. There's probably not going to be many Ohio State fans that'll make that trip to Madison. And then obviously the trip to Ann Arbor, that's a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? Those tickets are, right. If somebody has it, they're holding on to it. They're probably not selling it. So this is an opportunity, I think, for Ohio State fans to see a marquee game for a relatively decent price, while also being able to travel a short distance to be able to watch the Buckeyes.
Yeah, don't have to worry about airfare and that kind of stuff, obviously, if you're actually in Ohio. So, well, let's talk about some specifics, some personnel in this game. The last time we talked, it was Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. That they were kind of trying to figure out who was going to be the quarterback. It obviously turned out to be McCord. He has started all 3 games, and this will be his 5th career start coming in here this weekend. How would you describe what you've seen from him through these first 3 games?
It's been a progression. And I think that Ryan Day had some comments about that today in his press conference, that Kyle McCord has grown in each opportunity that he's taken the field for Ohio State. The Indiana game was rough. You know, he didn't complete a lot of passes that he probably should have. It didn't seem like he was able to extend the field by throwing over the top of the defense. And then, you know, Youngstown State comes around where he's able to perform well, but in a short sample size, because Ohio State was still experimenting with that 2-quarterback system between McCord and Brown. But now, as he faces Western Kentucky this past weekend, he's QB1. He's the guy that Ohio State turned to for all of its first-team reps, and he performed really well. 19 of 23, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns. He didn't have to work too hard to hit Marvin Harrison Jr. on that 75-yard go route. He was pretty wide open. But there were a couple of really nice throws. He had some good decision making when it came to throwing the ball to Emeka Egbuka a couple of times. He hit Cade Stover on some really nice curl routes, some nice crossing routes as well. It seemed like Kyle McCord, just as time has gone on, has gotten more comfortable. But again, that's happening against Indiana, against Youngstown State, against Western Kentucky, not against an opponent the caliber of Notre Dame. So I'll be very curious to see how he enters into this road environment, going up against a top 10 team, a formidable defense. There's obviously going to be first-year jitters. There's going to be some first-year bumps and bruises maybe along the way, but establishing the run will be huge for Ohio State, for getting Kyle McCord comfortable so that he can work off the play action. He really thrives off of that style of play. He thrives off of getting the ball to his receivers in open space. So I think Ohio State's really going to try and lean on the run and allow Kyle McCord to get comfortable that way.
I think we talked last year about C.J. Stroud and the start of C.J. Stroud's career. It wasn't necessarily all roses. There were some bumps in the road for him early on, and obviously over time it worked out. I think it always helps when you have all those NFL caliber receivers around you. But
right.
But is there anything like, is there a comparison to the way Stroud's career started and what you've seen from McCord so far, or is it completely different?
I think so. I think it's just trust, right? Like Ryan Day has to trust that his quarterback can make the routine plays routinely. That's a buzzword or a buzz phrase, maybe we'll call it, that Ryan Day uses all of the time. It's his quarterback needs to make the routine plays routinely. They need to take care of the football. And Kyle McCord has done that so far, or at least as time has gone on. Indiana, maybe not so much. You know, Youngstown State, there is a couple of bumps in the road. But Western Kentucky, he really showed that what the defense is going to give him, he will take. And I think that what helps him, as you mentioned, having Marvin Harrison Jr., having Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, even the development of guys like Xavier Johnson, freshman Carnell Tate, Cade Stover, out of the backfield, Travion Henderson and Chip Trayanum. You know, the Ohio State just has weapons around him that they will use and that they will try and find ways to get the balls in their hands. And I think that is something that has helped McCord as time has gone on, is just being able to see the weapons around him, very similar to how C.J. Stroud was able to lean on Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, guys like that. It's just, you know, you just got to let these guys make plays. You don't need to do anything that's extraordinary. You don't need to do anything that's going to maybe get you on SportsCenter top 10. It's just deliver the ball to them in space and let them go to work. And I think that the more he adopts that mindset, the more successful he'll become.
Because of he's got one interception, but because of the competition that you mentioned that he's played so far, it doesn't seem like he's made any fatal mistakes. Does it feel like, not necessarily bubble wrap, but does it feel at the same time like they've tried to protect him as much as possible?
I think so. You know, the one interception did happen on sort of an awkward play, I guess, where they were on 4th and short. They were in a play action play where the ball was designed to go to Chip Trayanum coming out of the backfield. And an Indiana defender made a really nice play to sort of chip, for pun intended, you know, got him out of the play. And then Kyle McCord on 4th down just needs to make something happen. He does sort of he makes a bad decision by throwing across his body into the middle of the field. Indiana intercepts the ball. But in that instance, he didn't settle by taking a sack or just tried to make a play. But outside of that, it seems like his decision-making has been sound in a lot of instances, just getting the ball where, again, the defense has allowed him to get the ball. whatever the defense is offering him, I think that Kyle McCord has done a really nice job over the past couple of weeks of just, delivering the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr. in space, delivering the ball to Emeka Egbuka in space, and just letting those guys work, just getting them an opportunity to catch the pass and then gain a couple of extra yards and keep those chains moving.
You mentioned Devin Brown and that sort of experiment, I guess. Is that completely a thing of, is that in their past now? Like, do you expect any Devin Brown this Saturday night?
I don't think so. Ohio State, they named Kyle McCord their definitive full-time starter, and I think that decision was made before the Western Kentucky game for the purpose of getting Kyle McCord ready for this Notre Dame game, to sort of allow Kyle McCord this past weekend to stop looking over his shoulder, to stop worrying about whether or not this will be his last possession before Devin Brown comes in the game. I think what they really need, and I think what Ohio State wants to do, is establish the run, get Kyle McCord in a rhythm, and then go from there. To take Kyle McCord out of his rhythm by inserting Devin Brown at any point could really inhibit what Ohio State wants to do offensively. And I think you saw that almost with Ohio State's first two results when they were operating out of that two quarterback system. They only scored 23 points against Indiana. They scored 35 points against Youngstown State. They come out with one quarterback, with Kyle McCord, in week 3 against Western Kentucky and score 63 points. That is an incredible achievement by any stretch, but also just by the fact that Ohio State was operating sort of in this disjointed, this clunky system offensively out of the first 2 weeks. And then they really exploded in week 3 against Western Kentucky.
Offensive line was probably the biggest concern coming out of the spring. They lost 3 starters from last year's team. How do you think they've looked so far? I've heard kind of maybe not as impressive. The first couple games looked better against Western Kentucky last week. How would you evaluate it?
From my perspective, I think the pass blocking has been decent. The run blocking is where Ohio State really needs to improve. Ohio State recruits very big, very tall, somewhat stiff offensive linemen, it seems. And the reason I say that is because they are all very talented when it comes to defending the pass rush, which makes sense considering how much Ohio State wants to pass the ball and how much Ryan Day wants his quarterbacks to operate out of the pocket. But when it comes to getting those guys moving, specifically when it comes to, Ohio State really relies on this stretch run concept. Not so much the gap blocking of having a running back push through the middle of the offensive line. They want Travion Henderson and Chip Trayanum and Mine Williams to get outside the tackle to really stretch the defense that way so that then they can work the pass game in. And for those tall, those heavy offensive linemen, to get them moving sideways, to get them moving off of their initial blockers to the second level has been a challenge. Now, I think that against Western Kentucky, they improved a little bit in that area, but you kind of have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because Western Kentucky's rush defense at the time was ranking below, I believe it was around 115 to 120 range nationally, after getting torched by USF and then Houston Christian in those first 2 weeks. So, going up against Notre Dame's front will be a totally different kind of challenge. I think they'll probably hold up fine in the pass rush and blocking for the pass. But when it really comes to establishing the run, that's the key, right? That's the key for Ohio State opening up the pass game. They're going to really need to rely on Travion Henderson and Chip Trayanum and that running back room to get 3 or 4 yards a carry each time so that they can open up opportunities for Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka. And that starts with the offensive line getting that push up front.
I mean, is this, when you look at this matchup this weekend, is this the biggest concern you think that they have going into this game?
I would agree. Yeah, I would say so. Ohio State's defense has looked really good so far. I think the biggest question with the defense was how would they defend against the pass attack, the level of Western Kentucky, and they proved themselves worthy last week with how they defended Austin Reed and Malachi Corley and that whole group of receivers. There is a threat that Sam Hartman and the Notre Dame receivers possess. Absolutely. Like Notre Dame, they will not overlook how talented the Irish are in that area of the game. But in terms of how the defense has responded to those questions so far this season, I would say that most Ohio State fans feel at least somewhat comfortable going into this game. But with the offensive line, I feel like most of the fan base is still wondering, do they have it? Is the chemistry all there? Is the 5 offensive linemen that they're using the most talented? Are the 5 offensive linemen that they're using able to defend Notre Dame's rush, not only in the pass, but also, as we just talked about, in the run game? Are they going to be able to push and get the running backs an opportunity to gain 3 or 4 yards a carry and to keep the chains moving? I would say that the offensive line right now has improved each week, similar to Kyle McCord, but this is going to be their most significant test yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same for Notre Dame, even though I don't know. First half of Central Michigan last week, there were some questions. Things worked out okay in the second half. You kind of led me into what I was going to ask about next, and that is the defense with Jim Knowles going into in his second year now as defensive coordinator. And again, they've looked good against the teams that they've played so far. When we talked in the spring, you talked about they've got to be better in the matchup games. In other words, the bigger competition matchup type games. And so I guess how much do you expect to find out about that side of the ball in this specific matchup with Notre Dame?
A lot. It's Notre Dame's offensive line. I think I just saw that Joe Alt was named the Outland Player of the Week for his performance against Central Michigan. Ohio State hasn't faced an offensive lineman like that. And Notre Dame's got a whole bunch of them, right? So I think that Ohio State's production, specifically on the defensive line, has been lacking a little bit in the first 3 weeks. A lot of people were pointing out that JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer didn't have a sack in the first 2 weeks, which was primarily brushed off by many of the people inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, inside the Ohio State program, primarily because Indiana and Youngstown State didn't throw the ball very much. But then Western Kentucky comes around, throws the ball a bunch. Still, those guys don't have sacks, but now at least we have some record of, okay, they got a couple of quarterback pressures. Tuimoloau and Sawyer combined for 13 quarterback pressures against Western Kentucky. Tyleik Williams got a sack in the backfield. Mike Hall got a tackle for loss. So some of the production, you started to see it against a team that was actually willing to throw the ball, and maybe a team that we might categorize as Western Kentucky wasn't at least trying to lose close. They were trying to win in many instances, which allowed them to be a little bit more aggressive and allowed Ohio State's defensive ends to generate a little bit more pressure. So I think that what I would like to see, and what a lot of people will be looking forward to seeing from Ohio State's defensive line, is just, will Sam Hartman operate out of a comfortable pocket the entire game, right? Will there be opportunities where Tuimoloau or Sawyer, Tyleik Williams, and Mike Hall, are they getting in the backfield and at least creating pressure? Sacks may be an overblown stat when it comes to how disruptive a defensive line can be, but will Sam Hartman be uncomfortable? Will he be maybe a little bit nervous in the pocket when he sees number 44 coming around the corner, or sees Jack Sawyer in his face as he's trying to complete a pass to one of his receivers? That's going to be huge for Ohio State. And then also with just stopping the run game in many instances. Estime is a very talented running back. So making him uncomfortable as well once he receives a handoff from Hartman or receives a pitch or whatever, just getting into the backfield and making them uncomfortable, keeping Notre Dame's offense, making them sustain long drives to score, I think is what Ohio State ultimately wants to achieve, is knowing that you're not going to hold Notre Dame to 0 points. But when they do get points, having your defensive line generate enough disruption, enough uncomfortability, that these drives that result in 3 or 7 points take a long time, and that Notre Dame is uncomfortable the entire time.
It's funny because I think when you look at these teams, they're kind of mirrors on both sides of the ball in terms of what the questions are, because Notre Dame does have some questions with its offensive line, and the flip side, that the pass rush is the same thing. They haven't generated a lot of sacks so far, but they're number 1 in the country in pass efficiency defense right now. So there's,
Right.
and it's the same thing, you know, how much Marcus Freeman was talking about it yesterday. How, you know, he said he would take the number one pass efficiency. I think that you know, probably quietly he would take a few more sacks here and there though as well, some pressures.
Right. Right. You want game-changing plays. Yeah, like
Right.
you want your star players to have opportunities to alter games by sacks, by forced fumbles, tackles for loss, whether it's your defensive backs or your linebackers, whoever, getting some pass breakups. You want plays that get your defense going, that lift the energy and the spirits of your team. But as we know, that's just one facet of the game. As Freeman was talking about in his press conference, you know, being efficient as a defense maybe doesn't always result in numbers that show up in the box score. It could also just be a matter of how uncomfortable are you making an offense as they're trying to drive down the field and score on your defense. And I think you're right in saying that Freeman and Ryan Day and Jim Knowles have a very similar philosophy in that way. You know, you understand that in a top 10 matchup, it's going to be a dogfight for 4 quarters. It's going to be a matter of how disruptive are you, regardless of how many stats show up in the box score when that game is over.
It's funny. We were talking before we started about how in the past Marcus Freeman has said some things about his alma mater, Ohio State, that Ohio State fans didn't necessarily take to very well. He didn't go there with any of the questions that he had yesterday. Are Buckeye fans kind of like, do they have scorecards out anytime Marcus Freeman potentially is going to talk about Ohio State?
Not as much as Desmond Howard. We can say that much.
Yeah, that's. I think
Ohio State fans,
that's something that the two fan bases can both agree on.
Certainly, yeah. Desmond Howard is always on Ohio State fans' radar, but Marcus Freeman, no. I think that most Ohio State fans understand that he's learning on the job. You know, at this point, he hasn't said anything, you know, that's been derogatory or has been, you know, has really altered the way that Ohio State fans look at him, right? He hasn't done anything to that magnitude. But it may add a little bit of extra juice to the matchup, you know, from some Ohio State fans, you know, well, they'll take anything and run with it. You know, Kirk Herbstreit's talked a lot about that kind of fan base here in Ohio State, right, with the 15%ers, the bunch of Ohio State fans that'll be mad about anything. You know, they're the fans that are upset about Marcus Freeman's comments right now. I think most fans, though, are kind of in the perspective that, you know, it's going to be a good game on Saturday, and that no matter the result, that, you know, Marcus Freeman's still a Buckeye. He's still somebody that gave his blood, sweat, and tears to Ohio State for a couple of years, playing under Jim Tressel, and that'll always be important, and that they understand that Marcus Freeman still loves and thinks fondly of that time.
Lorenzo Styles, of course, transferred from here to there after the spring. It doesn't look like he's played so far. I assume we're probably not expecting to see him Saturday.
I don't think so. You know, we've been kind of wondering the same thing, the media contingent here, about what Ohio State plans to do with him. You know, he made that switch from wide receiver to cornerback, and he seems to be developing well from all the conversations that we've had about him with the secondary coach, Tim Walton, and with Jim Knowles and Ryan Day. But right now it seems like he's specifically doing special teams activities, being on special teams units. Whether or not he'll surpass that 4-game limit for a red shirt, that's something that's still to be decided. I think that that's probably the direction that Ohio State's heading with him, just to give him some extra time to develop at corner after making that switch. Though that's kind of just my interpretation of the events that are currently playing out. I wouldn't say that that's anything official. But ultimately, I wouldn't say that you should expect to see Lorenzo Styles on Saturday. I think that Ohio State's pretty content with running Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, Jordan Hancock, and Jair Brown out of that cornerback room for right now.
All right. Sounds good. Chase Brown, 11warriors.com, getting ready for Notre Dame and Ohio State. Hey, thanks again, Chase. Great stuff as always. It's always great talking to you. And, you know, like I said, maybe they schedule another series down the line, or they play in the playoff at some point. We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. That is Chase Brown from 11warriors.com. I told you he'd be better than the Last Insider. I don't want to keep throwing shade at the former, the Last Insider, but you know what I'm saying. You were here. You were here for it. You know what I'm talking about. Rushman, we were talking about Lorenzo Styles, says he plays special teams. And I have heard that since then. On Notre Dame's season stats, they have a participation chart, so you can go and you can look and see who's played in what game, whether or not they are picking up stats. I went to Ohio State's season stats to look for the same thing. Their stats are much more abbreviated than Notre Dame's, and they do not have that participation chart. So I could not tell just by going and looking at their stats whether or not he was seeing that kind of action. So do appreciate you chiming in with that. Couple things we were talking about, the whole red and fans and all that stuff. Bryce says the ushers at Notre Dame Stadium should note where the Ohio State fans are sitting and find the season ticket holders who are selling their tickets to the Ohio State fans. Now that would be quite a task for the ushers to keep track of. The good news is they hired a guy, and I think we were talking about this last night during the mailbag. They hired a guy to help avoid the red outs, and he is actually, we were talking about, he is tracking it on a computer. He has like his stadium seating chart, and they know because since all the tickets are electronic e-tickets now, they know where it's all going. And again, we mentioned this yesterday. Pete Sampson, The Athletic, wrote a whole article about it. This guy with the, tracking the seats and tracking the tickets, who's selling what and all that. And as Tim says, they're not punishing people. They know who the people are who are selling the tickets, and they are able to track, what the initial sale was, where they go to after that. They know all this stuff. One big thing they are doing this year, the 5,000 ticket allotment that Ohio State got. Typically what they have done is they give that 5,000 ticket allotment and they put the opposing team in that corner of the end zone. What would that be? The southeast corner of the end zone next to the big video screen. They put them down there. They are not doing that for Ohio State. They have spread out the 5,000 seats across the stadium in upper levels of the stadium, upper rows of the stadium. So those 5,000 seats will not be clustered together, and they are going to be higher up. And, again, they're tracking all this. I'm going to be really curious to see what that actually translates into Saturday night at the stadium, because what happens on the secondary market, as I was mentioning with Chase Brown? Do people ultimately, end up getting those seats from the secondary market? Now, again, they did not open. They sold the season tickets. Obviously, they began selling season tickets earlier. They did not, beyond the season tickets, they did not open sales of this game to the general public. They went about and essentially sold the tickets, gave opportunities to buy the tickets to people, who are more Notre Dame friendly, I guess, in a big effort to try to get more Notre Dame and obviously fewer Ohio State fans in this game Saturday night. They want to avoid that red. They want as much green as possible. They'll have those LED bracelets for all the fans in their seats out there Saturday night. And don't forget, if you are going to the game and you get one of those LEDs, don't swap it with someone. Don't steal it. Don't take multiples. Let everyone have their own bracelet, because they are all, each bracelet corresponds to the specific seat that they set it in. And there's going to be different light shows and stuff like that where, strobing and all that different stuff going on out there. So should be a lot of fun. We shall see. We shall see Saturday night. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, we'll be talking about it afterwards in the post-game show and next week as well. That's going to do it for IB Nation Sports Talk for this week. And, of course, coming up, we've got IB Countdown to Kickoff. Vince and Jesse and I will have that for you this weekend as well. The YouTube will go up Friday night, and the pods will drop Saturday morning, and you'll have all day Saturday, whether you're watching other games or mowing your lawn or out for a walk or whatever you happen to be doing, driving around. If you're driving in town for the game, you can listen to the shows at that point as well. So have a great weekend. Enjoy the game. We will talk to you again. We'll talk to you on IB Countdown to Kickoff, but otherwise we'll talk to you next week. Hit that like button before you leave, and of course, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you later on IB Nation Sports Talk.